Well, let's now speak to Theresa Fallon, who's director of the Center for Russia and Europe-Asia Studies and a senior fellow at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Thank you so much for joining us, Theresa. So 2 years since the war, or what Russia calls a special military operation, what's your assessment? Who do you think are the winners and losers militarily and politically?
Well, it's a terrible war, and as that footage demonstrated, the death on both sides is horrendous. No one expected the Ukrainians to last this long. But you asked, what are the winners and losers of all of this? And I would say one of the biggest winners is China. Russia has sold half of its petroleum products, oil and energy, to China. So they've been using shadow fleets. China also gets a weakened Russia, which means that they're able to negotiate for things that Russia was unwilling to sell them just even in the recent past. So they'll have perhaps more access to the Arctic bases that Russia controls, and they might also be able to negotiate with the Russians for high-level technology, silent submarine engines, and advanced missile technology that the Chinese would really like to purchase from the Russians.
But what about politically?
Well, now we're seeing an interesting impasse in the United States with the U.S. election coming. President Biden has his initiative to have this money sent to Ukraine has been blocked by a group of Republicans. They're trying to tie this to a border issue, and this has been a huge disappointment for Ukraine. I was reading how Ukrainian soldiers are actually following U.S. politics so closely because this money is desperately needed. The Ukrainians don't even have artillery shells. So this dragging of the feet in domestic politics inside the U.S. Congress has a huge impact on Ukraine. Yeah. And it also has a trickle-down effect. There's a U.S. congressional delegation visiting Taiwan, and they're being quizzed about what's going on in the United States. Does this mean that the U.S. will really come to our aid should anything happen in cross-strait relations between Taiwan and the People's Republic of China?
Yeah. Well, what is today precisely the strategy, the West's strategy when it comes to Ukraine? We've seen high-profile visits from European leaders to Kyiv, but they seem to be failing to fill the gap in military supplies left by the U.S. What is the West's real strategy in Ukraine today? Is it real proactive, a proactive strategy to help Ukraine repel Russia, or is there something else at stake?
That's a really good question, because we saw at the Munich Security Conference, they had this tagline, lose, lose. So it hasn't really been clear that anyone really wanted Ukraine to win. That's been one of the questions. It's kind of, everyone's been dribbling various types of weapon systems to Ukraine. So that means, is their heart really into this? And by taking so long to respond, it actually gave Russia plenty of time to dig in and set mines. And it's been very, very difficult for the Ukrainians to overcome this. So the question remains, what is the final outcome? Is everyone just happy with this situation as it stands? And because the U.S. is holding back funding right now due to domestic issues, the Europeans have had plenty of time. I mean, this war is not 2 years old. It's 10 years old. The initial annexation of Crimea happened in 2014. And so the Europeans had plenty of time to start getting their act together, but they haven't done that. And I think that's a deeply worrying sign. We've seen a new cache of sanctions.
Yeah, but the EU has agreed a new round of sanctions. Yeah. But are those sanctions having any impact, do you think? I mean, the Americans have also imposed new sanctions in the wake of Alexei Navalny's death. Is it having any impact on Russia?
Well, I would say the European sanctions, it's the first time they've actually increased the sanctions and included China and India. So I'm in India right now, and it's a bit of a shock for the Indians to be included in all of this. And I think that they're expanding the sanctions. President Biden made it very clear to Putin, if Alexei Navalny died under his custody, he would be punished. So the U.S. has reeled out 500 new sanctions. How this will have an effect, I mean, will be interesting to see. But I think that sanctions do take a while to take place, and Russia's economy is being affected by this. There's also the unintended consequence that they are becoming even more and more reliant on China. So you have this kind of Russia-China bloc with a much weaker Russia. And there's not, I mean, if they can't give them weapons in Europe, for example, all they're doing is tightening the sanctions regime. And that also hurts European economies. Governments don't have a big appetite for that because their economy is slowing down. This is a big election year across Europe as well. So there's a lot of pieces involved in all of this. And we're seeing a growth in populism in Europe. And so there's a bit of fatigue to continue to support Ukraine as well. But we're really at a very important impasse right now. And I think that this anniversary is clearly marking an important inflection point, both for the US and for Europe.
Very interesting to talk to you about this. Thank you so much for joining us. Theresa Fallon, Director of the Center for Russia, Europe, Asia Studies and a Senior Fellow at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Thank you for your time.